in New York, there was an exorcist in New York City. His name was Father Jim Labar. He told me a very interesting story about a musician. So this girl was at Juilliard, young Filipino girl, Catholic, and she was a violinist, gifted violinist. And it was time to graduate, and all these people are getting job offers, and she wasn't really getting any. And she was constantly heard saying, I would do anything to be famous. People heard her say that. Anything, imagine that. So one night she goes to bed, she has a dream. And in the dream, this beautiful, beautiful naked man comes to her and says, do you want to be famous? And she says, I do. And he pulls out a contract and he cuts her finger and says, sign it in your blood. So she signs it. And she's the contract with his finger, and it explodes into flames and falls on the floor as ashes. Now, you can deduce from that dream, she basically, like, that's that classic, I sold my soul for fame, right? Well, here's the problem. When she woke up the next morning, her finger was cut and the ashes were on the floor. Now, at this point, you would think you would call your priest and say, I think something happened here, but she doesn't tell anybody. And then within weeks, she's picked up for a world tour, and she makes a ton of money, and in that circle becomes very famous. Here's the money now. The money comes in, gets involved with drugs, and then she starts using needles, and then she gets HIV, and now she's dying of AIDS in a hospital in New York City. And she remembers how this all started, and she calls her mother and says, come here, I have to tell you something. She tells her very devout Catholic Filipino mother the story of the beautiful man and the contract. And so the mother calls the chancery in New York City and says, I need the exorcist. And they send Father Labar. And so Father Labar shows up. He hears the whole story and says, doesn't sound good. I think what you need to do is you're going to have to write out the whole creed of what we believe, and then you're going to have to cut your finger and sign that in blood. Well, the doctors don't like this. She has AIDS. They don't want her cutting her finger and bleeding all over the place. But eventually he prevails, and she does it. And as soon as she signs it, she codes and violently goes into convulsions on the table and then dies. Oh, they're pointing fingers at the priest. The mother's hysterical. Everybody's screaming and yelling. This went on for about 10 minutes. And then all of a sudden, she jumps up off the table. She's back. And they test her. No HIV, no AIDS. She's cured as well. So that young woman decided from that day forward, she was now had to tell the world that the devil's real. You don't make any bargains with him. And you have to get close to Jesus Christ. Changed her whole life. Changed Father Labar's life.
Very clever. So there was a case when I was in Rome studying of a doctor in Rome who was a Catholic, very Catholic man, Catholic family. And one day he was approached by a colleague who said, you want to triple your income? And he says, well, of course. Well, who wouldn't? He says, come with me to this party this weekend. Just you, not your wife. So he goes, and it starts out like a normal cocktail party. Very fancy. And then at some point in the party, these dozen men came walking in black hooded robes and did some kind of a weird ceremony, a ceremony that he didn't understand. And one of them eventually came up to him. He was introduced. This is part of the group. And we understand you're interested in making, triple your money that you currently make. And he said, well, yeah, but like, what is this all about? And they said, well, we're kind of a group that we have different worshipings that we do than what you're probably used to. But in order to gain entry, we would need you to give us one of your children.
Really?
So think about this. So he says, well, of course, I'm not going to give you one of my kids. And the guy goes, not physically, just give us a name. And that's your offering to us. So he didn't believe in any of this devil stuff. So he gave the name of one of his kids. And within a couple of days, I believe it was a daughter, she was having night terrors every night. She couldn't sleep. She went into despair. And she was suicidal by the end of the week. And he knew what was happening. He put the pieces together and said, something bad's happening here. So he told his wife. Of course, she was not happy. And she called the priest, and the priest called the diocese, and they sent the exorcist. And he said to the man, you've created a big problem because these are very powerful people. And I can do the deliverance of your daughter, but you need to get out of here. Like, you need to move to the south of Italy and don't tell anybody where you are, because they will not want you to get out of this sort of like a contract he made with them. And so he did that. They sold everything and moved, and the girl was fine. She was set free. But like, here's a practicing Catholic who unknowingly steps into this situation where he gives them permission, right? The devil always needs permission, but sometimes he tricks people into thinking this is just a game. Don't worry. The biggest problem I see is that there's too many people who don't believe any of this is real.
Ephesians 6 verses 10 to 11. Finally, be strong in the Lord and in the strength of his might. Put on the full armor of God, so that you will be able to stand firm against the schemes of the devil.